John's Gospel and to chapter 18, or if you've got a phone that you want to follow along with, that would be equally great. John chapter 18, we're going to just read a few verses, verse 33 to 38. We're going through this series over the Christmas period, thinking about why Christmas? Why did Jesus come? What is the reason for the season? And this morning we're going to focus mainly on verse 37. But let me start reading at verse 33. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him." Amen. We've come to the end of another year. These years seem to tick over with increasing rapidity. But we come to the end of another year, and usually at the end of a year, it's time to take stock and to look back on a year that's passed. And over the last few decades, one of the ways people have tried to summarize the year that's passed is through giving the award for the Word of the Year. Have you seen that? Usually around December, the Word of the Year gets announced. What's the Word of the Year for this year? Does anyone know? Not Brexit. No, that was a couple of years ago. The Word of the Year for this year is climate emergency. If you go online, you can type in Word of the Year and you can get a list of the last probably 20 years. I think they've been doing it, of the different words of the year. It makes interesting reading. And as I looked down the list, there were two particular entries on previous years that caught my attention. So the Oxford English Dictionary Word of the Year for 2016 was post-truth. Post-truth. The idea behind the word post-truth is that we are moving past the truth. The idea of absolute truth is somehow a past idea that we don't need anymore. Truth is relative. You've got your truth, I've got my truth. We can all decide what's true for us. Post-truth. If you looked at the list again, you would find something even more interesting. 2017, Collins English Dictionary Word of the Year. Fake news. Fake news. Now, the term fake news presumes that there's something that's true and genuine. There's the real deal, and then there's something that's fake. Fake news is false and sensational headlines that are presented as though they're credible journalism. And fake news is a concern to people because it leaves them like questioning their ability to be able to decide what's true and what's not. So a year after we have post-truth, we have false news. And there's another organisation that gives out the award for Word of the Year. This organisation is called the Global Language Use Word of the Year. They look at what word is used most. And for 2017, their Word of the Year was truth. So 1 year after having post-truth, we have truth. As you look down these Word of the Year, it says one thing to me. It says we have a strange relationship with the truth. On one level, we think we can do without it. We can decide what's true. At another level, we realise that we desperately need the truth. We need to know what's true. Without an absolute truth, our world falls apart. And when we turn to John's Gospel this morning, we see that this strange relationship with the truth is nothing new. Did you hear Pilate's question? What is truth? You'd be concerned, wouldn't you, if that was your judge, the one who was conducting your trial, and he said, what's truth? We don't know how he asked. Was he asking as a genuine seeker? Was that his tone of voice? What's the truth? Or was he a kind of cynic? What's truth? We don't have his tone of voice, but I think from his actions, Pilate is in the skeptic camp. He asks what is truth, and then he turns and walks off. He doesn't really want the answer. Pilate seems to want the truth, but he doesn't want the truth. Pilate, he's the guy in charge of Jesus' trial, and he wants a truth that will keep Jerusalem quiet. He wants a truth that will keep him in a job. He wants a truth that will keep Caesar, the king, happy. The truth that Jesus is king is just not the truth that he wants. He wants a different truth. We've just celebrated this Christmas, haven't we, the birth of the Lord Jesus, the one who was born a king. He didn't become a king, he was born a king. And while this is announced by the angels as good news of great joy, it's news that always causes a stir, that Jesus is king. It caused a stir, didn't it, in the nativity story. In the account when King Herod heard there'd been another king born, a king of the Jews. And we read that Jerusalem and Herod were deeply disturbed by that news. And here in John's Gospel, over 30 years on, the news that Jesus is king is still causing a stir. Herod, he wanted to go on a murderous rampage to get rid of every infant in Bethlehem. And now the Jewish leaders are on a murderous rampage to get rid of Jesus, the king. The truth that Jesus is king is unbearable to them. If you were to read through chapter 18 and chapter 19 of John's Gospel, when you go home, you would see that words about king and kingship and crowns and robes come up lots of times. I think I counted about 12 or 13 in just a couple of chapters. That's the backdrop to these chapters. Jesus, the king. And we're going to zoom in on verse 37. Let me read it to you again. Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king, and for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" We've got two headings as we think about this verse this morning, and hopefully they'll come up on the screen. The first heading is King of Truth, and the second heading is Kingdom of Truth. And there's a map of where we're heading on the screen. So if you feel like you're lost in the clouds at any point during the sermon, just have a look at the map and get reorientated. So first of all, the King of Truth. Pilate, he's got Jesus before him. Jesus is on trial, and the Jews have made this accusation about Jesus that he claims to be the King of the Jews. They know that accusation will put Jesus in trouble with the Roman authorities. It will put Jesus on a collision course with Caesar, who's the king. That's why they put that particular accusation against Jesus. And Pilate's questioning Jesus to try and find out if this is true or not. And Jesus describes his kingdom to Pilate in verse 36. Can you see that? He describes it in negative terms. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world." Jesus said his kingdom is not about violence and swords and spears and fighting for power. That's what he means when he says his kingdom is not of this world. That's why in the garden, when Peter jumps up, when they come to arrest Jesus, and Peter jumps up and chops off someone's ear, Jesus tells him to put his sword away because his kingdom is not of this world. Pilate jumps on this and says, "So you are a king?" And Jesus agrees. But then he goes on to describe what kind of king he is. He's the king of truth. He says, "For this purpose I was born, for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth." Jesus is the king of truth. Some people, when they read Jesus' words, they chalk him off as a good teacher. Someone who's like everyone else, but just got some good stuff to say. When people say that, I wonder if they've ever read Jesus' words. Verse 37 would be very strange words for a good teacher to say. I had good teachers at school, one particular one, Mr. Smith, my physics teacher. He was a great teacher. But if he said something like verse 37, I think he'd lost it. "For this purpose I have come into the world." Can you imagine if I said that this morning? "For this purpose I have come into the world." You would think, who does Luke think he is? Yeah, that's what Jesus says. Jesus, his words say that he pre-existed his coming into the world. There was a time he came into the world, and before that there was a time that he was. He pre-existed his coming into the world. In fact, John has already told us right at the start of his gospel that he pre-existed the world. Everything was made through him. And the reason, the purpose he came into the world was to bear witness to the truth. This language of bearing witness is the language of the courtroom, isn't it? You know, the man who's seen the offence take place, he's called to the witness stand to give an account of what he has seen and heard. It's ironic that Jesus is in a courtroom. He's in the courtroom as the accused. But he says, actually, he's come to bear witness. So in verse 36, he states his kingship negatively. His kingdom is not of this world. But it would be a mistake to think his kingship has nothing to do with this world, because it does. In verse 37, he states it positively, "I came into the world to bear witness to the truth." And we are reminded this morning that if we want to know the truth, we don't find the truth by looking inside ourselves. We don't find the truth by traveling the world and seeking after this experience and that experience. We find the truth by looking at and listening to the one whose job it is, the one whose purpose it was to come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Christmas reveals to us the fact that the truth exists outside of us, and it comes to us in a person, Jesus Christ. So what is his witness? What is his testimony? Well, the first part of his testimony is that he speaks the whole truth about God. Jesus speaks the whole truth about God. We read, didn't we, those opening words in John's Gospel on Christmas morning. Jesus says, described as the Word. And it says in verse 14 of chapter 1, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." Then in verse 17, "The law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." Jesus is God's ultimate and final sermon. And if we want to know the whole truth about God, we must look to Jesus. Jesus isn't just bringing part of the puzzle. You've maybe heard the story, the fable of the blind men in the room with the elephant, haven't you? Maybe not, I'll tell it you. A room with an elephant in it and blind men. And one blind man gets hold of the elephant's leg and he says, "Oh, I know what an elephant's like. An elephant's just like a great tree trunk." Another one gets hold of the elephant's tail and says, no, you're wrong. The elephant's more like a snake. Another one gets hold of the elephant's ear and says, no, you're both wrong. It's like a velvety blanket. And the idea is that no one's got the monopoly on the truth about God. We all know a little bit. So if we want to know the truth about what God's like, we've got to go here. We need a bit of humanism, a bit of Eastern mysticism, a bit of Hinduism. We'll have a little bit of Jesus. And if we can piece the puzzle together and we can know the truth. But Jesus is saying here, he isn't bringing a part of the truth. He's bearing witness to the whole truth about God. I want us to see this morning from God's word that Jesus makes exclusive claims. We can't have Jesus as one amongst many. He is the truth. Victoria reminded us, didn't she, of those words from John's Gospel, chapter 14. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And Jesus would say, whoever has seen the Father, whoever has seen me has seen the Father. He speaks the whole truth about God. There is no truth to be found anywhere else that we will not find more fully in Jesus. He also speaks the whole truth about the world. So the whole truth about God, that's his testimony, and the whole truth about the world. Now, the world in John's Gospel is a phrase, the world, that comes up often. It doesn't just mean the earth. It doesn't even just mean creation. It means something, it has a negative connotation to it. So the world, it is creation, but it's particularly humanity as the head of creation, organised in rebellion against God. The world has these negative connotations. And so when John writes in John 3:16, for God so loved the world, that's not a comment on how lovely our world is. That's a comment on the depth of God's love for a world of rebels. What is the truth about the world? Well, Jesus' testimony about the world is this. Without Jesus, we are a world without the truth, and we are willing captives of a lie. Without Jesus, we are a world without the truth, and we are willing captives of a lie. We need the truth, but we cannot bear the truth. If you want to turn back to John 8, I just want to show you this testimony of Jesus working out as he speaks with some of the Jews at one of the religious feasts. The Jews at the religious feast have a problem with what Jesus is saying. Jesus has been talking about the type of king he is. He's been saying that he's been sent by God and that he's the Son come from the Father. And then he goes on to say, verse 42, I think, not verse 42. I'll read you it because I've got it written in my notes. He says, why do you not understand what I say? And then he answers his own question. It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. And then he goes on in verse 44 of chapter 8. You are of your father, the devil, Jesus says. Your will is to do what your father desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and has nothing to do with the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. The reason these Jews will not believe Jesus is because he speaks the truth. Without Jesus, we are a world without the truth, and we are willing captives to a lie. We would rather have lies that we have made our own than kneel and worship the King of Truth. How does that look like in our individual lives? Well, it varies. For some people, they are kind of militant in their opposition to Jesus. They are obviously against him. They write books against him. They persecute his church. That's happening in many places in our world today. People who belong to Jesus are being persecuted and killed simply because they follow King Jesus. That's what these religious leaders were doing here in chapter 18. They wanted Jesus crucified. That's what Herod was doing back in chapter 2 of Matthew's Gospel. But our captivity to a lie doesn't always look like that. For many others, their captivity to a lie looks more like Pilate. Pilate isn't aggressive in his opposition to Jesus. He's just, what's truth? For him, the truth about Jesus as King is unbearable because it's inconvenient. He can't really face up to the fact that Jesus is King because it's going to mean too many changes for him. It's going to affect his job. It's going to affect his status. For lots of people, they refuse the truth just because it's inconvenient. They don't like the idea of Jesus being King. So we hang on to our lies and ignore Jesus' testimony. Let me try to give you an image of what our world is like. In John's Gospel, he likes these pairs like truth and lies. Another pair that he uses often is light and darkness. Truth and lies are a bit abstract. Light and darkness, we understand that better. Imagine the teenager that's been out late on Friday night. Saturday morning comes, they're fast asleep. 11 o'clock comes, they're fast asleep. 12 o'clock comes, they're still fast asleep. The sun is blazing outside. The parent comes in as frustrated that the child is still in bed. So goes over and opens the curtains and the sunbeams kind of blaze into the room. The teenager opens his eyes. The sunbeams go through his pupil and kind of burn his retina. What does he do? He says, shut the curtains. Can't bear the light. That's our world. We cannot bear the truth. We are held captive to the lie. And maybe this morning you've heard all about King Jesus. But there are reasons, all sorts of reasons why you just can't take him seriously. All sorts of reasons why you just can't afford to listen to his testimony. If that's you, then Jesus says you are suppressing the truth and you are willing captive to a lie. So Jesus is the King of truth. The reason he was born was to bear witness to the truth about who God is, the whole truth, and the truth about this world. And then we move on to our second point, which is the kingdom of truth. If bearing witness to the truth helps us understand Jesus' kingly rule, well, the last words of verse 37 help us understand the kingdom of truth, what Jesus' kingdom is like. Every king has a kingdom, and Jesus is no different. Who is part of this kingdom of truth? Well, Jesus says, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. As Jesus comes into the world with his testimony of truth, it's going to reveal his kingdom. We've already seen his kingdom isn't about swords and spears and military might. That's not how he's going to build his kingdom. His kingdom is going to be built by his word, by his testimony to the truth. And it's going to be seen in those who listen to his words. Now we must understand that word listen. Listen is not the same as hearing. There are lots of things we hear that we don't listen to. So we hear the traffic passing on the road outside, but we don't listen to it. We hear the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. It's there all the time, but we don't really listen to it. We hear the swish of the milking parlour, but we don't listen to it. Children may hear the words to stop and look before they cross the road. But then when they see their friends, they just run out with paying any regard to cars because they've heard, but they've They've not really listened. Listen means we must pay attention and we must shape our actions in line with what we've heard. And Jesus told a story about listening. It was a story of a wise builder and a foolish builder. So the wise man, he built his house on the rock, the storms came, and his house stood firm. The foolish man built his house on the sand, the storms came, and the house fell flat. What's the difference between the wise and foolish builder? Was it that they both heard? Was it that one heard and the other didn't? No. They both heard. The difference was that one heard and decided to let what he heard shape his actions. So if we're really going to listen to Jesus' words, it can't be in one ear and out the other ear. We must let what he says shape our lives. Everyone who is of the truth, Jesus says, listens to my voice. Here, as we head into another year, it's a good time, isn't it, to ask the question, am I listening to Jesus' words? Am I really listening to Jesus' words? Let's go back to the courtroom with Pilate, and I just want to point out three things about Jesus' words as we move towards a close. The first thing about Jesus' words to Pilate is that they are subversive. I was trying to think of a different word, but it just fits so well, subversive. So what does subversive mean? Subversive means to undermine established systems of power. And as Jesus speaks to Pilate, he really pulls the rug out from under his feet. See, Pilate thinks he's the powerful man. Pilate thinks he's the governor. He thinks he's the judge and Jesus is the one on trial in the dock. That's how Pilate is seeing things. But then as Jesus speaks these words to him, those who are of the truth listen to my voice, Pilate suddenly realizes his power has been subverted. He's not the judge. Jesus is the judge. It isn't Jesus in the dock, but suddenly he's in the dock. He's the one that's on trial by King Jesus, the King of truth. Suddenly, his response to Jesus' words is going to determine whether he's of the truth or whether he's not of the truth, whether he's part of the only kingdom that matters or whether he's not part of the only kingdom that matters. This is what Jesus' words do to us, and we don't like it. We like to be the judge and jury. We like to be one who comes to our Bibles and we read Jesus' words and we assess whether we should listen or not. But the reality is, every time we come to God's word, we are the ones in the dock. We are the ones that are being judged. And our response to Jesus will determine whether we are of the truth. It's not our verdict about him that matters as much as his verdict about us. So Jesus' words are subversive, but they're also a summons. They're an invitation. Can you hear the invite, the summons in Jesus' words? Everyone who is of the truth listens to my words. Pilate, will you listen to my testimony? Will you give it due attention? Will you take it seriously? Can you hear the invitation? Jesus is summoning Pilate to come to him, to listen. And even this morning, as we read these words, they are a summons to us. Will we listen to Jesus' testimony, to the truth? Will we give him our full attention? Not just coming to church once a week because it's what we're in the habit of doing. Not just opening our Bibles and shutting them again, but listening and letting what Jesus says change us, holding on to it, letting it fill our hearts and minds. Jesus said, if you know the truth will set you free. Maybe you've been coming along to church for quite a while, but you've never really considered seriously Jesus' testimony. I want to mention again that Christianity Explored course that we're having, that would be a great way to listen to Jesus' testimony and to give him your attention. So these are a summons. Everybody who is of the truth listens to my words. These words are also serious. Jesus' words are always serious, desperately serious. Like I said at the start, we don't know the tone of Pilate's response to Jesus. What is truth? But he didn't stick around to listen, did he? He stood before the one who came into the world with the very purpose of bearing witness to the truth. He asked the right question to the right person, what is truth? And then it says, after he had said this, he left. And the verdict was passed. Pilate is not of the truth. Pilate is still deceived. Pilate is still held captive by lies. Pilate is still destined for judgment. How desperately serious these words are. So why Christmas? For this purpose Jesus was born. For this purpose he came into the world, to bear witness to the truth. And the questions we must all face this morning is, are we of the truth? Well, the answer to that question will be determined by the answer to this one. Are we listening to his words? Let me pray, and then we'll sing our final song together.